we're talking about how to differentiate yourself if you are in the mix and in the ring with really big established brands and products. If you're offering something different than the status quo, you want to visually show that. Something that I have done a lot of the times when working with brands who are considered specialty in their vertical is I will really intentionally mess up what people expect to find on PDPs and on landing pages in general. Creative and content is your number one resource when it comes to targeting. When I go about creating landing pages, especially for these specialty brands, I think a lot about I love working with Pilothouse because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilothouse, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilothouse, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome back to Ad-venturous, the podcast produced by DTC and hosted by me, Aves. Today, I wanted to go back to my roots and talk about milk because, I don't know, I like milk. The concept of doing marketing for milk is really funny to me. And obviously, we kicked off this podcast with a whole episode about one specific got milk ad, which is my favorite. I think it's my favorite episode of the podcast ever and also my favorite ad ever. The two are probably linked in a way. But today I wanted to go back to milk because I wanted to talk about the sort of concept of DTC brands being in this like almost David and Goliath like fight sometimes with really big institutions. And I wanted to use an example, actually Oatly, which is an oat-based milk. Not my favorite milk alternative. To quickly jump on my own soapbox, I love soy milk and I think it's the best milk alternative out there. Almond, oat, I'm not crazy about it. Cashew is like way at the bottom of the list for me. Soy is at the top. I think it's better, but Oatly does some really fun stuff with their marketing, especially out of home. So I thought it would be a fun episode to kind of dive into this idea of how we tackle really big established brands as players in the DTC space. I think I mentioned this last week when I was talking about how important social proof is and making sure that people feel comfortable making a purchase from you. But it is literally easier now than it ever has been to launch a DTC brand. It's so like interesting to me to think about because I think it creates a lot of really positive shifts in the marketplace. There's a lot more in terms of options. Sometimes I see people too with like such a unique, cool product idea that fits my needs completely, that it feels so niche. And it's like previously business was just different. You would maybe find those things at like an in-person market, but now it's so easy to go on the World Wide Web and find whatever you want. So yeah, just wanted to use this example of like alternative milk and also big milk, we can call it, traditional milk, cow's milk, gross milk, if we're being honest. Wanted to use this as an example because I think Oatly has done a really terrific job of not reinventing the wheel because at the end of the day, it is literally oat milk. Like they don't need to be doing too much in terms of marketing, but they have really differentiated themselves from the other alternatives and from traditional milk itself. I feel like I'm not going to land. Maybe I should just actually commit right now at the top of the episode to saying dairy milk. I think that's the most normal way to put it. Traditional milk sounds really weird to me. Big milk sounds like anti-dairy milk propaganda. So let's just go dairy milk. I think that's like the most normal way of explaining it. Anyway, back to Oatly versus dairy milk. Yeah, the concept is really interesting, right? If you think about launching a brand or a product, that sits in direct opposition to something that is so classic in every household and something that is so established and trusted. I think that this specific example of like alternative milk versus dairy milk is very interesting because there was a bit of a cultural shift and people moved away from drinking dairy milk. That's all fine and dandy. I feel like when we look at other sort of DTC brands versus really established brands, it's not as cut and dry because, like I mentioned, there's just a cultural moment where, thank goodness, we all decided to stop drinking dairy milk. And so there was a lot more opportunity for Oatly to be really fun and be really playful. But a lot of the times you have to be more cautious than they have been in that you don't want to really turn people off of that original product or the original establishment. You sort of need to recenter someone's focus onto your brand and what are the actual features and benefits that you bring to the table. So let's chat a little bit about Oatly and how they go about their messaging because like I mentioned at the top, I think they do a really fantastic job and I think it's also just really funny. I love a funny ad. I think there's nothing better you can make than an ad that makes someone laugh. It is like the most effective way to do good marketing. And I think they do a lot of really cool out of home stuff, which we don't typically talk about because obviously, I mean, I said at the beginning of every podcast, produced by DTC. We are a direct to consumer focused podcast over here, but out of home stuff can be super fun and also both complement one another, what you're doing on ecom. And if you are doing any sort of out of home billboards, print, whatever, that is really cool beans to me. That's really fun. It's really interesting, yeah, to think about how the two sort of like work together. But anyway, back to Oatly. How they position themselves is so light-hearted, but also incredibly different than dairy milk or really other alternative milks as well. Oatly really, like I mentioned, they lead with humor and they do a lot of poking fun at I almost said traditional milk, guys. They do a lot of poking fun at dairy milk, which I think is very beneficial to them in this setting because it is, again, much more of an us versus them than just trying to shave off a little bit of the market. They are, by and large, servicing people who do not want anything to do with actual dairy milk. So it is, like I mentioned, you're not isolating anyone by doing that. In fact, you're having a good time and most likely grabbing a lot of eyeballs out there in the world. Oatly, like I mentioned, they do a lot of really fun print and they play around a lot with copy, which I think is really interesting and also really smart because guess what? It's frickin' milk. Even if it's made with oats, it's still like the most boring thing in the world to look at. It's a glass of like creamy oat milk is never going to be a super exciting visual, no matter how you stylize it. So I love that they, if you check out their ad library, and I'll post a few sort of ad breakdowns on LinkedIn after this comes out, but if you look at their ad library specifically and their out of home marketing materials, you will see a lot of copy focused ads, which again is really smart. Just play to your strengths. I think that's a really nice takeaway if we're talking about how to differentiate yourself. If you are sort of in the mix and in the ring with really big established brands and products, choosing to go the route of sassy copy is sort of new in the general milk space, and it really works for them for all the reasons I've already said in this episode. I think both in out of home and also digital marketing, the move to like focus on copy is just so smart, like I mentioned. And I also think that it is in stark contrast when we think stylistically about a lot of milk. I'm going to talk about gut milk. I don't know if you can like hear it in the audio, but I did start to smile more and more as soon as I started thinking about gut milk because I love it so much. But if you think about the way that they like position the product, they often, we talked about this in the first episode, in later iterations of that ad campaign, they partnered milk with like very famous people because milk on its own was not enough to drive people and get people excited. Definitely previous to gut milk, when we're thinking about like the 50s and 60s, milk does a body good. A lot of the times they would picture like a nice cold glass of milk. First of all, gross. Second of all, it was paired with this idea that like, again, milk does a body good. It was a very like traditional ad campaign. And so it didn't require any sort of like thinking outside of the box because it was sort of the first time anyone had done that. And it's really, again, interesting and crazy and weird to think about having to advertise milk. But it was the first milk campaign first like big visual milk campaign. So of course, imagery of like a tantalizing glass of milk worked really well. It was also a really different time. If we think way back to milk does a body good, people were not used to the insanity of the internet that we know today. There was no like violently short attention spans. Things were much different. So you could intake the pictures of milk in a different way. Where again, if Oatly was just running a bunch of really stylized imagery of their product, it just wouldn't connect with this idea that they are disrupting a very established space. And it wouldn't really grab our attention and force us to reconsider what type of milk we are consuming. Another thing I want to mention about Oatly specifically, which I think is a good highlight for anyone again who's in this situation where you're going up against a really established vertical, it's that Oatly has done a really good job of designing their product as well. So it does stand out. The packaging looks really different, which is also not something we typically talk about or think about on this podcast, but it is really critical, especially like I mentioned, when you are in these spaces that are very defined already as a vertical. Thinking about how you can make your product show up differently, especially if you're a brick and mortar vendor, is really important because if you're offering something different than the status quo, you want to visually show that. It's like any experience I've ever had where we're talking about brick and mortar, it's very similar to someone scrolling on Amazon or a different marketplace where it's like every product is next to each other. So there's different considerations when that is your jam versus just independent ads blasted across different platforms and the universe. It's like a very different space to be playing in because like I said, you're trying to grab and demand attention away from the usual suspects and what people are comfortable grabbing and choosing off the shelves. I think a really good lesson in that as well is to think about, I always do this whenever I talk about brick and mortar, I always bring it back to the website experience because again, that's a little bit more what you and I are thinking about and talking about every day, but I do think it's really a good comp and a good thing to talk about. Something that I have done a lot of the times when working with brands who are considered specialty in their vertical is I will really intentionally mess up what people expect to find on PDPs and on landing pages in general. I'll really mess with people's perceptions of a vertical. I think that we talked about differentiating as a brand in a previous episode. I think that this sort of conversation is a little bit different when we're talking about differentiating within the space and also in a really sort of small wink wink way. So go look at competitor websites, and something that I say all the time, and I'm going to be a little bit hypocritical in this, is I usually say that, you know, if you're producing like a healthy soda alternative, do not compare yourself to Coca-Cola because that is stupid and you have a much smaller marketing budget, so you cannot do the same things that they do. But in this one instance, I would recommend going to those sort of big legacy brands, seeing how they present themselves, especially in their web experiences, and then trying to challenge yourself to find ways to not do the exact opposite. Again, you still want people to feel comfortable making the choice in your product, but you want them to note that it's different and that it feels very different to purchase from you versus one of those big established legacy brands. I think this is also really fun work, and I think that it being fun work is kind of highlighted in how fun the marketing for Oatly is, to really, again, like poke small amounts of fun at that already established way of thinking about your vertical, because it's going to attract the right people while simultaneously showing that you are doing things in a much different capacity. So a good example of this would be if all of your competitors are focused on, like, let's go back to the milk, really focused on highlighting stylized photography on their PDP. First of all, this is obviously a wacky example because who orders dairy milk online? That would be nuts. But if that was the case and all of the pictures were like really crisp glasses of milk sitting on like traditional tablecloths, something that would be really fun to experiment with is just like really honest depictions of what it looks like to drink milk out of the carton and or spill milk, you know, really playing up, if you are Oatly or my favorite soy milk beverage company, really playing up the juxtaposition between what you are presenting and what is already being presented in the vertical. Another piece I want to mention when we're talking about post-click and web experiences, when we are trying to go up against these juggernaut legacy brands, is I want to talk about landing pages specifically and how much they can do to help you tell the story of why you're different. Something that I see a lot of brands in this situation, like I mentioned, your sort of specialty in the vertical. A big mistake I see a lot of people make is trying to give all of the details in the world in a single ad. So say we are, I'll keep using Oatly as the example. Say we're Oatly and we're talking about dairy milk, trying to produce an ad that ticks off all the boxes in terms of why culturally dairy milk is kind of falling off, why maybe oat milk is better for you from a health point of view. I don't really know if that's true, to be completely honest. I'm just going to say it. And then we also maybe want to talk about the flavor of oat milk being better than traditional dairy milk. That is too much information to throw at someone in a like pre-click capacity. Even if you have a really great piece of creator generated content, trying to tackle every single reason why someone should make the switch from that big established juggernaut brand to your brand and your product, it's just way too much for someone to chew on when you are in a feed, whether that is Meta, whether we're talking about AppLovin or Pinterest, TikTok, whatever. It's just, like I said, it's too much information to expect someone to be able to bite off and chew all in one instance, which is why landing pages really come into focus here, especially for these specialty brands, because you need space and time to be able to give people the story about why you are different and why your product actually can come to play on all the sort of different USPs that the dairy milk in this case has to offer. So, say we are running a fun, spunky little ad. We're working with let's do a pretend soy milk company instead of Oatly. Working with a pretend soy milk company, and we're running a fun, spunky, text-focused ad calling out how lame dairy milk is. That is going to generate a lot of clicks if we write the copy and it's funny and it's cute. So if it's a good ad, it'll generate a lot of clicks. And the beauty about an ad like that, that's just funny and broad, is that there are a bunch of different ways that you can push someone to an actual conversion once you have them on the landing page. I think I've used this example before, but it's really like your ad is a store sign and then your landing page is the store. I love using that example. It's so easy to think about. But yeah, if we've got people in the door based on humor and they think it's a little funny, it's a little cheeky, we've got a lot of different options. And this is something I believe I've mentioned previously, but it is very exciting to me. I am someone who's still on the tools. Like I still work directly with some of our clients. So I'm in the trenches with you right now. I am looking at those CPMs. It is, as it always is at this time of year, expensive to run ads. And so one thing I wanted to chat about was how we go about testing pages, especially for ads that are really broad and can bring a lot of different people into the fold. When I go about creating landing pages, especially for these specialty brands, I think a lot about net new traffic. Obviously, I'm always thinking about new customer acquisition. It is fun to do, but I think a lot about the assumptions that I might be making about them as someone who is very close to the brands that I do work with, sort of day in and day out. So I think a lot about how to subvert their expectations while also not putting too much onus on my own expertise and expectations of their experience of brand. What I mean by that is I typically try to focus a lot of time and attention on the content that exists above the fold on the landing page. So again, using this example, I've got someone in, they've clicked on the page, we're talking about soy milk versus dairy milk. I am most likely going to find our most engaging visuals to test above the fold, which just means like immediately when someone lands before that bar of either press or information, it's just what is in the hero section of your landing page. So I'm going to kind of typically go back, do some history seeking. Sometimes I will pull organic posts and imagery and video that has done really well. Sometimes I'll take imagery and video that's done really well in ads. It is in your best interest to test all of these things. I was going to say it's a little bit annoying, but it shouldn't ever feel annoying. It's like a fun adventure. So you should be looking to test all of these things and really think about, again, are we doing the most we can with that real estate, because it is prime real estate. As soon as someone clicks an ad, they want to see something else that's going to keep them engaged. So I really pay attention to that imagery above the fold just to make sure that it's, number one, engaging, and then number two, I try to cycle out anything that doesn't really tell the story of why to switch from dairy milk to soy milk immediately. I know that sounds really difficult to capture in a single image, but I'm sure if you start looking at your own imagery, you will find some of it that kind of speaks to the USP that most clearly differentiates you from those big legacy brands. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start looking at testing copy there. Because like I said, the easiest way to get someone into the fold is to directly call out that legacy brand and product with some fun, cheeky copy. But realistically, we don't know anything about someone who would click on that ad other than they're interested in switching from dairy milk to our imaginary soy milk company. So I will go about testing different angles, and usually when I start testing post-click, which I think this is a really good tip, I have already established some parameters through pre-click testing, because it is a lot easier and faster to run through ad testing rather than landing page testing when you're just starting to identify what ads and angles actually work. It's always best to do that on the pre-click side first. So let's pretend that I've been in this painstaking but also fun work of trying to find the angles that work best for my soy milk brand. And let's pretend they are health and also taste. I'm going to say consistency, and I want you all to know that is a personal bias. I haven't had a glass of regular dairy milk in a long time, but I feel like it is thick and it is gross. And then the last one is going to be shelf life, because I have upstairs in my kitchen pantry like 12 things of the soy milk we use for our coffee because it doesn't go bad. We just buy it in bulk and it sits in the cupboard. It's far superior to dairy milk, but I'm not going to go on another milk related tangent. So those are the angles that I have found through testing ads that work really well for this product. What I'm going to immediately do is start testing those as headlines. And you want to be really distinct about this because, like I said, you cannot just immediately give someone every single reason to make the switch from a really established product or brand to your sort of scrappy little DTC brand. It's not going to happen. You're not going to, again, give them every piece of information they need all at once. You need to stagger it out. That's why I'm talking so much about pre-click in this episode, about like kind of David and Goliath, DTC companies that are taking on these bigger legacy brands, because post-click is really where we can shine. It's really where we can do a lot of education. So I want to spend a little bit more time here. So we would want to test all of those angles that we identified as separate headlines. I don't want to see a list above the fold. I just don't. I don't want to see an unrelated headline and then subheadline above the fold. I just don't. It's bad practice. It's bad use of that prime real estate, and it's going to confuse people and kind of muddy the waters a little bit. So what you want to do is take your top angles and you want to find, I love doing this. It's like, I don't think I really get to do it enough anymore. It's very fun. You want to find copy that complements both parts of the angle, which basically just means you want to be able to grab a headline and a subheadline that kind of encompasses the angle in a full way. I find this, again, as someone who's like I feel like a copywriter first, to be completely honest with you. I just get distracted doing all these other things. That is so important to be able to deliver a 1-2 punch above the fold and really pique people's interest at that point in time. So don't put too much pressure on the copy and force yourself to figure out, like I mentioned, a headline that says one thing, subheadline that says the other. Keep it simple. Occam's razor, easiest solution is probably the best one. So test those distinct headlines up against each other first. And like I mentioned, the coolest thing about this type of situation to be in when we're just bringing in a broad audience who are curious about our product is that we can really play and have a good time. So you want to test separately, first your imagery. I like 4. It totally depends on the amount of traffic. I typically work with pretty high scale brands, but 4 is a really nice number for testing. 2 or 3 if you don't have that much traffic and it's going to take you a long time to get to like statistical significance with 4. 2 is fine. Take your top 2. Same with then you're going to want to test different combinations of the winning image and different copy in that sort of above the fold space. Very important to test them again one by one with the winning imagery. It's like, I feel like this is so lame to say, but it is really invaluable to your business to take the time to actually do this work and figure out what is like the brightest, shiniest headline, because you're probably eventually going to want to move that over to your homepage and you're probably going to see a drastic bump in conversion rate when you do. So like I said, it really just pays dividends to do the work like this. The next thing, and you're going to say, okay, what's going on the rest of the page? We're surely done. No, wrong. I love to test CTAs in my button that lives above the fold. It is a dream to me to write funny copy that lives in a button and convinces people to click said button. Again, it's silly, it's goofy, but testing 2 or 3 variants of this, it's really going to give you a feel for like what kind of person you're talking to, what makes them laugh, and what makes them want to engage with your brand even more, which like I think we have enough evidence looking at Oatly's entire marketing portfolio. That is basically what they do. So you really want to make sure again that you're just figuring out what makes people laugh and makes people entertained by my product, which I am positioning against this like entire legacy. The other thing you're going to want to test, so we're talking about copy in those CTA buttons. I'm going to take it a step further. We're not done with above the fold yet when we are testing. The next thing I love to test is the destination of that button, which, oh my goodness, you might say, waste of time. Not at all. What I have found over my many years of marketing experience at this point is don't trust people not to skip all of the content that you give them. I think, especially in this case where we're talking about trying to educate people to make a switch in their routine, you really want to make sure that you're giving folks the opportunity to see all the information you've given them. So, something that I love doing is a split test almost immediately once I've discovered all the different pieces of a above the fold portion of a page that work well. That's when I start testing the destination links. And I want to test what happens if I say, push them straight from landing page, top of the fold, button CTA to PDP. I want to try that versus maybe just pushing them further along down that landing page so that I'm ensuring they're seeing the actual content. How I decide where I'd like to send traffic is usually a conversation between myself and the media planner that I'm working with. And it's also typically governed by AOV and the amount of explanation and the length of the consideration window. What I mean by that is if I am selling, say my pretend soy milk brand, our cartons of soy milk are $400 a pop, I am not going to, in any case, send that traffic immediately to the cart or even maybe to a PDP, because that is a lot of money to pay for a single carton of soy milk. So I want to keep them invested and keep them learning before I slam that really outrageous price in front of them. Obviously, that is a really exaggerated situation, but it is worth thinking about. Do you want to risk sending people to cart or to PDP too early, or do you really want to be able to take your time and show them the actual value before presenting them with the price? I have done some really crazy things in terms of like keeping people sort of in the process of their consideration window on pages. I have run like insane stunts where there's like an ad, a landing page, another landing page, and then they go to a PDP. They don't even go to cart. So there's so many clicks between the ad and the actual purchase. And I know a lot of the times people tell you to minimize that, but when there is this consideration on your part, it's really important to think about, is it realistic for someone to see an ad and click through and immediately buy this thing? A lot of products, especially these days, it's a no. So don't be afraid to set up journeys for people that aren't immediately focused on conversion if your product does live in that high AOV category, especially say in this situation, if my carton of soy milk is $400, This is really embarrassing, but I don't know how much milk costs, like dairy milk. Like $4? I don't know. I haven't bought it in a very long time. But say it's, it's like such an that's like, I don't know. Please sound off in the comments. How much is milk? But yeah, it's if it's such a big jump between this traditional version of the product and what you're selling, again, do not be afraid to take your time, because if someone is genuinely interested in buying your product, they want more information, because you are selling something that is worth more than the competitor, and they want to know why. I think the they want to know why part often gets lost on people, and they feel this like weird pressure to get the clicks down. Wrong. So once I test the like destination portion of the above the fold content, that is when I truly feel comfortable and I start like tweaking the actual landing page itself. And that process, like, I don't want to undersell how long it takes. It sometimes takes months, and I have like landing pages that I have been working on for like so long that I'm just tinkering with in the background at all times, because there's like no perfect version, in my opinion, of an ad or a landing page. You can always do more to make it better, especially when we're talking about DTC, and especially when we're talking about paid digital media. You have every opportunity to test, so you might as well just keep doing it, in my opinion. But yeah, there are pages that I've been working on for so long, and then I'll find a new winning angle on the ad side and I'll bring it to the page. It's a really beautiful symbiotic relationship in my mind. But yeah, don't want to undersell how long that should take you. Make sure that you get to what is for you statistical significance when you're running these tests, and that you're really sound in your decision making. Because like I mentioned, if you take your time and you put in the effort on this post-click side of things, especially if we are facing up against big players in the space, it can really help you strengthen your overall page experience and also just your overall offering to the marketplace, which is so important when you are trying to battle these like big legacy brands that people just feel comfortable and safe purchasing. I do want to mention as well, all of this testing wouldn't be possible if we over here at Pilothouse didn't have our own proprietary tool called Warp Drive. It is like one of my favorite things to talk about because it is so freaking cool. It's one of those things that I don't honestly really know like how it works. I just know how to work it. I am not a web developer, but essentially what Warp Drive allows us to do for our clients is to test landing pages at scale without losing all of the social proof that we have well earned on our ads. Basically, in case you didn't know, usually when you switch out a destination link on the meta side of things, you reset your learnings on the ad. And I will do an episode in the next couple of weeks specifically about content creation and Andromeda and meta. But one thing that's really interesting to note is we are moving closer and closer towards this. I think we're kind of in it now, reality where creative and content is your number one resource when it comes to targeting. So jeopardizing your learnings is a lot steeper of a price to pay than it was even a few years ago, which is also really interesting and also makes me feel really grateful to be able to leverage a tool like Warp Drive as I'm working to scale accounts, because it takes out that kind of scary piece where you're losing, like I mentioned, all of those hard-earned learnings and resetting an ad. So Warp Drive also allows us to test landing pages at scale from, say, we've got one perfect ad, like I mentioned, it's like a text-based ad for my soy milk company. We can then split test that traffic very easily, which also sort of harbors all of this testing and research that I was just going through. It makes it a lot easier. So we can split test, we can control their percentages, and it just gives you that extra security of knowing that the pre-click side of things is really like sealed away in that setting, and there's not too many variables. So when you are going nuts like I do and testing every single different part of your above the fold content on a landing page, it really allows you, again, just to feel secure in what's going on and what's performing on the pre-click side of things, because that is what sort of generated the momentum in the first place, and you don't want to lose that at all. So post-click is so important in those like specialty situations I guess is the best way to put it. And if you feel like, you are constantly educating your, especially net new customers, on why you are different than the main large, big competitor in your space, I'd really take a look at what you have going on. If you don't have the capacity right now in house or to bring on a partner who can help you make landing pages, my advice would be to set up a page that lives on your store, whether it's Shopify, wherever your actual store lives, and to set up sort of an about page if you haven't already, or to set up a straight up us versus them, soy milk versus dairy milk page that lives on your website, and start testing sending traffic to that. Something I will say, if you're not, again, doing the me and testing every little thing and acting like a mad scientist about your landing pages, something I really want to implore is that you make those pages easy to shop. This is a tip that I do wish someone had given me when I was a little baby marketer, but you want to make sure that if you're putting all this effort into an education style page that's going to live on your website, so not a landing page fully that you've created, but just a, back end part your site, you really want to make sure that that is shoppable if you are going to run traffic to it. Also, I will say you want to make sure it's shoppable even if you're not running traffic to it, because a lot of the times it'll get picked up in like SEO. I've been reading a lot about different AI LLMs and how they're using websites like Reddit to really populate their knowledge base. Won't get into that tangent here because it would be a long one. But yeah, I think it's really important in this day and age to make sure that if you're creating any page that's going to live on your website, unless of course it's like a shipping and returns or something, you make it very easy for people to shop that page. Again, especially if you don't have the capacity to be pumping out pages and testing them at scale, this is your best bet. So you want to make sure that you're not just educating people on the differences between your $400 carton of soy milk and a $4 carton of regular milk, and then just letting that be. You want to give them, again, every opportunity to actually purchase from that page itself or to link it out to a PDP. That was not as much milk chatter as I thought there would be. I really tried to have some like self-control. I didn't want to go too deep into the milk lore. I went kind of deep into the milk lore, but I do think it's important to mention it's like dairy milk is kind of gross and soy is just so much better. I'm a big coffee person. We have a really nice like kind of barista espresso situation going, and I just feel like almond milk specifically tastes rotten in coffee, and oat is like fine, I guess. I think it breaks me out. I have no substantial evidence to prove that. Regular milk, also at this point, dairy milk, it does taste rotten to me. So soy milk is like the only way, and you can get really good. Now, I made it through the whole episode and now I'm going off about milk, but you can make really good soy milks that are specifically meant for coffee that will like change the way that you think about coffee, which sounds dramatic, but it's not. That was the episode. I hope it provided some value. If you want to chat about landing pages specifically or just about marketing in general, I know it is a really crazy time out there. Like I mentioned, I am still on brands. I still work directly with clients. So I am in the trenches with you this Q4 and hopefully every Q4 for the rest of my life. I fucking love running ads. It's so fun during this time of year. But anyway, I am in the trenches. I get it. Long hours, things are stressful. So if you want to chat about any kind of support we can provide on the Pilothouse side, head to the website, fill out a lead form, or if you want to chat about planning for new year, new me Q1, would love to do that as well. Something that I have witnessed a lot, again, and I wish someone would have given me this advice when I was a little baby marketer, is that you should not burn yourself out during Q4. I mean, that feels really obvious and evident, but a lot of products have a real upswing. I will do an episode about Q5, even though I think it is a really stupid thing to say. Do not burn yourself out. Make sure you're thinking about what your actual plans are for next year. And yeah, that was the episode. Like I mentioned, not too much milk, maybe a little bit crazy on the milk at the end. I hope it was valuable, especially if you find yourself in that like zone of being a specialty brand and specialty product in a vertical with an established kind of juggernaut. It can be really difficult, but I also just think in general, like Oatly is a great example. There are a lot of room for different brands and people are really excited about the idea of, purchasing from a founder who is relatable to them. There's a lot of instances where, people prefer to shop from those scrappier DTC brands compared to the really big bloated guys. So don't fret. It's all good. It's always easy to do to like disrupt a space, and you kind of get to have more fun that way too. I do hope you enjoyed the episode and you got some value out of it. If you want to drop a comment or any suggestions of any topics that you want us to cover on Ad-venturous, I would love that. Love to help out. And tune in next week for another fun episode where I will not talk about milk at all. I promise. I did my big one this week. No more milk next week.